Today we're discussing the question, what part of our success does God get credit for in reality? There's a lot of things we can do that are just going to work, right? We can build strategies, we can work hard, we can be intelligent with how we invest our time and our money. How do we make sure we're staying on track with what God's asking us to do? And how do we achieve the kind of success that God wants us to have and not just material or public success? If you'd like to hear more, tune in. Hey everybody, welcome to the Allison Park Leadership Podcast, where we have our culture creating conversations. I'm Dave.
And my name is Jeff, and we're glad you're with us today. Of course, we're father and son, and both on staff at Allison Park Church. I'm the lead pastor. Dave is the Northside campus pastor. And we're glad you're with us today.
Absolutely. Quickly, thank you for joining us. We were talking today about how, maybe you're a longtime listener, but did you know that you could actually be a viewer as well?
Yeah.
If you, obviously we're on YouTube, if you want to search Allison Park Leadership Podcast, but also Spotify has a video option now where if you click on the podcast, you can actually watch the whole episode right there on your phone. So we'd love to invite you to join that part of the conversation.
Yeah, and we were talking about how we actually admitted to each other just before the podcast how when we listen to a podcast, I almost always forward the first 4 minutes of the podcast because I know there's advertisements that happen there, or people just sort of talk about starting the podcast. But what we thought we'd do different today is to say another way to engage with us besides the likes and the reviews is to just leave us a comment. We love hearing from you that way too. Comment on the topic, or even just something that you want to say to us about future episodes or whatever. We'd love to hear from you on any of those platforms.
So if you didn't skip and you would like to comment,
there you go.
Thank you for sticking with us so far. 5 years ago in November, was it 5 years? Yeah, 5 years ago in November.
Was when we started.
Isn't that wild?
Yeah.
It's also wild to me to think that we started right before COVID hit.
So this is like the 5-year anniversary episode. Huh?
Almost, not quite. Or I think November 19th was our first one we ever released.
Okay.
So, but we're coming up on it. Anyway, I think maybe our very first episode, or it was one of our first three, because we recorded them all at the same time, was titled "What is Success?" Do you remember that one?
I remember it vaguely. I mean,
Okay.
since it's 5 years ago. But yeah, I think
I was the one that was more compelled by it, so it
Yeah.
makes sense, because I was like, this is awesome. We wanted to do some kind of a follow-up. It's a little different, but today I think we're going to discuss this question of what is God's role in my success, right? Or did you have a different way to phrase that question?
No, I think that's a good way. I do remember, now that you mention it, Dave, because you were, I think, moving into a new role.
Yeah.
With the Allison Park. You had finished up your youth pastor role and you were getting ready to take Northside. And you were going through some soul searching about how do I know I'm doing well in ministry. And we then asked the question, because I think a lot of people feel this about life. And I think a lot of people who are pastors and leaders in churches feel this way, is how do I know? Because the comparative standard isn't a good measure. So we wrestled with some internal identity questions, I think, on that particular issue. What makes me successful? What makes me pleasing to God? But this particular question that we're going to deal with today is slightly off of that. It's different from that, right?
Yeah. So I think this question for me started thinking about the church world. And I know you were mentioning to me that you think it's a lot broader than that. But let me just start with the context of my sort of world that I'm in. I found it weird whenever I was jumping into ministry, how there are formulas and strategies for growing a church that seem to work, not necessarily universally, but in America, at least if you're in a similar part of similar socioeconomic status. Like if you're in the suburbs, if you're by a college, or if you're in this part of a highway, do these kind of things, send out these kind of mailers, have these kind of services with these kind of sermon series and questions and social media this way. And generally it works, right? And in terms of like getting numbers there. And like to me, I was like, oh, that, like at first I was like, that's weird. And I was like, oh, that's cool. Like through leadership, we can grow something. And I think my question that I've been sort of thinking through recently is, so what part does God have in the growth of something? Like when it comes to growing a church, if you follow a formula and you work really hard and you do what seems to work with mailers and these zip codes and, and these kind of family-oriented events and captivating sermon series. Like, is the growth in those phases, is that from just good leadership? Or is there a degree of God's releasing something? Or is it like, well, God's releasing something, but we almost act like it's us? Or then what about situations that are not those? Like, so I'm in a very urban demographic, and I've realized that the growth strategies that work in suburban places, particularly in the South too, they haven't really, like when mailers don't work that well, what do you do? When people don't do social media, when even like door-to-door flyering is different. Like, so certain strategies aren't the same. They don't translate the same way. But I think like beyond, I'm not just talking about Northside, just with churches in general. Say somebody's really working hard to try to grow their church, to reach the lost, to disciple people. It's not going as quickly as they hoped. It's not going as well as they hoped. Is it just the strategy's bad, or is it God is holding something back right now because it's all about the Kairos specific timing of God and we're waiting for the next wave to hit? Or like basically, what role does God have to play in something growing or being healthy? And what role is it leadership or our responsibility or our job? Does that make sense?
Sure.
And I do think it goes beyond churches. I think the question of, as a leader, like, what is God's role in my success?
As a business leader, as a parent, as whatever. Like, is it just technique based? Is there some spiritual formula to this?
Yeah, because it feels like the way that leadership culture would talk about this, even in Christian circles, is it's like you lead really well and you do your best, and God's there in the background. And God made all this possible. You know what I mean? All credit to God. But it's like,
so like I just scored a touchdown. This is because of God's work in my life, right?
Yeah.
We celebrate those moments in athletes' lives or performers' lives. They'll give all glory to God for it.
But in reality, what they're really thinking, and everybody else is thinking.
We're of course Steelers fans from Pittsburgh. I happen to see Justin Fields, who's currently our quarterback. Whether he is next week or not, we don't know. But he walked into the stadium and he said, "Just here to bring glory to God." That was his T-shirt, right? And so I think the intentionality about that, whatever I'm going to do, I want to do for the honor and glory of God. I think that's beautiful.
Yeah, of course.
Right? But it does seem like then when we do well, we think, well, God must have, brought this about in my life. And we do poorly, then the question is, well, maybe I did something wrong, or
no, I
might be
think,
missing something in my life.
I think we generally give credit to God the way that God generally gets credit for all good things.
Yeah.
But it's really, I did this.
Yeah.
Do you know what I'm saying? Like that's too far, maybe a little bit.
I did this, but I want to give glory to God for it, kind of a thing.
Yeah, and God enabled me because he showed me that this strategy would work. But I was the one that had to bust my butt. Yeah. You know what I'm saying?
Right.
So it's like, what role does God have in growth and in success?
Okay, so let's go back just to the whole church world thing for a minute. So we'll get to this generally, and if you're not a church leader, maybe this will be interesting to you from a curiosity point of view, or maybe you've had questions about why the churches are organized like this. So in my lifetime, Dave, the church world shifted from the community-based small church pastor who was primarily involved with pastoral care, preparing sermons, and most churches were about 200 or under. And it shifted to a sort of a church growth model. The whole church growth world was developed, church growth conferences and seminars. I remember my father, when he restarted the church in Monroeville that he led, by the end of the 1970s, there were now this trend of some of the very first churches being 800-900 people. And my father pastored a church that grew to 800 or 900 people with multiple services in the same building. And it was sort of like, wow, look how big this church is. It's amazing. But there were really very few churches bigger than 1,000. And now there are churches that are 100,000,
right?
Like Life Church with Pastor Craig Groeschel or Stephen Furtick and Elevation Church, where you have these mega churches. And around the world, you have some churches that are hundreds of thousands. Okay, so there became this church growth technique world where some of the things we would learn from the business world or from leadership skills, we applied. Like some of the things that we do now to open churches when we plant a new church are very similar to when you open a new furniture store. right? So our grand opening day is on this particular day, and we're going to have these sales going on. And you send out postcards and mailers, and you do a marketing campaign, and you center everything around getting people there on that one day, because if you can get buzz created around the launching of your new furniture store and people have a very good experience, then you end up becoming a part of that community, an identifiable part of that community. Same kind of thing is true with planting a church. I've done this over and over and coached pastors to do this, where you practice your services. You don't invite people into the moments where you're not ready and prepared to receive guests. And then once you get everything down and you're pretty confident in what you're going to be able to provide, then you have the grand opening Sunday, and you bring as many people to that as you possibly can. And people enter that as if that church has been in existence for a decade, because you have excellence on every level. And people think, I could bring my family here, and they come back. And all of this is based upon some techniques that work in suburban America to draw a crowd. And then if you continue that same discipline of large attractional events and effective communication and a process strategically that moves people from one step to the next, you're going to pastor a growing congregation. And all of that is wise. I don't think we would be against any of that. But now your question is, can we do that without God?
Yeah, no, totally.
Like, in what role does God play in that?
Because somebody could run a great furniture store without God.
Sure, right.
You know, like, it might not be God honoring, but it could be, monetarily doing really well, and you could have even a good staff culture.
And if you have enough money to hire the right musicians to be on stage and as part of your worship team, and you have a pastor who's a gifted communicator, and you got the ability to organize great children's programs with a good brand and a great Instagram social media profile, you are good to go.
You're primed to blow up. Especially if you're in an area that is a growing part of the city. People are moving in a lot. And
right. Well, that's part of the strategy of planting churches, is you go to a high growth area with a lot of new families that are being displaced because they moved from one place to another, and they're looking for community. And if you hit that right at the right time, you can blow up pretty fast.
Yeah. So this leads to my question.
Which none of that is wrong or bad. It's all good thinking.
Sure.
To do anything other than that would almost be
negligence.
Yeah, right. It'd be like, why would I not do any of that stuff?
Sure.
Especially because now I can be taught step by step in a manual how to make all that work so that I can be as effective as possible in reaching the maximum number of people that could be reached.
Yeah. To be clear, like, now that we know there's like some science to gathering people, building a crowd, and how it works in suburban America. I think, of course, we should use that. I think we should do everything for the maximum effectiveness of spreading the gospel and making disciples. My question is beyond that, though. It's, okay, so if there are techniques to plant a church, there are also techniques to grow a church. Mm-hmm. And I think you could technically, and there probably are places like this, I have none in mind that I'm not even criticizing, but because you have a very good leader, a CEO-type leader who's very good at managing teams and processes and systems, and they're a gifted communicator, you can almost lead your church to growth, whether or not it is even like you could lead your church to growth even if it wasn't a God-honoring place. I'm not saying that is the case.
Well, isn't that what we talk about all the time with celebrity pastors who have built large organizations who have some kind of fall in their life? Or you find out that behind the scenes, maybe they were living something like a double life experience. And we say, how could that happen? They built this mega success. But then you see beneath the surface that it wasn't built on a healthy foundation. And what you're saying is it is actually possible. So the model of pastor in America in 2024 is the CEO model.
Yeah. The gifted communicator CEO.
The motivational speaker / CEO model of church.
Yeah, right, right. Yeah, so
we went from the 1960s, which was the chaplaincy model, which is basically, I'm here to be your pastor. I'm going to be here to care for your soul. I'm going to create community for us to enjoy. And we went from chaplain pastor to CEO pastor, CEO motivational speaker pastor.
Yeah, like Steve Jobs. Maybe that's the wrong one, but
Yeah.
the young, like, cool, dresses well,
Innovative.
like, innovative,
effective, looks
like,
good on social media.
Exactly, exactly.
Now that is a suburban. I wouldn't say it probably plays anywhere to some degree, less in urban spaces than in maybe suburban or rural communities. But yeah, in fact, it's hard to really be noticed as a successful pastor if you don't fit into that category.
Sure. So this is the question, and I just want to be totally clear. I think that many people do that and honor God like crazy, and I think that they grow the churches with that model, and they're brilliant, and they're a phenomenal communicator, and God called them to do this, and God gifted them to do this, and they're reaching the lost and making disciples, and I have no problem with that. This is not a critique of the model. Like, don't be like that. Like, let's go back towards chaplaincy. That's not the goal of this. The goal is it just formulaic, or does God have a role in the growth? How do we know if God has a role in the growth? Like, if he is, so obviously you could do it without him, and you could have a church that is built on a bad foundation that's due for collapse at any point. But assuming that it was
Healthy.
like, yeah, how do we, like, where is the credit given to God, and not just like he's in the background, but it's mostly our hard work. Like, pray like it all depends on God, work like it all depends on you, and mostly it depends on you, but God's in the background blessing you with the gifts and talents you had. Like, where is it that? Where is it? How do we invite God to be a part of the process so that it's not just we are leading and he's happy with us? Where is it we're following and leading people in following? Like, how do we? Does that make sense? That I'm asking.
I think it does. So maybe we take a little turn on this, because we would say. So I'll make personal observations. So I think I lead like a CEO motivational speaker leader, don't I?
Probably.
To
Some
degree,
you're a little more hands off than a typical CEO leader would probably be.
Okay, hands off how?
So I feel like before the 100 Church vision, you were probably engaged in the day-to-day, like running and growth. And then largely you kind of passed a lot off to executive leaders. And now you're like you're more of like a executive coach, communicator. You know what I mean? Hands on a lot of other places and kingdom initiatives. And yeah, you still do CEO things too. But anyway.
So not the hard driving CEO.
No, right.
Yeah. Okay. Yeah, that's interesting that you thought that. I didn't know you thought that. Okay, so I probably was birthed in an era, the 80s, 90s, and what do you call the early 2000s, where I was striving to learn from CEO, pastor leaders, and motivational speakers. I remember hearing Bill Hybels from Willow Creek talk about one of the gifts in Romans chapter 12 is leadership. And he says, if you're a leader, lead with diligence. And he was saying, he was sort of like the model CEO of Willow Creek. He kind of thought of himself that way and built this empire of influence through what he was doing at Willow Creek. And he was basically saying, squeeze every drop of your leadership skill out of yourself so that you can build the maximum effective organization so that you can reach the maximum amount of people. Okay. So I was groomed in that. I think I was striving to be that in many ways. And so I've been sort of raised in that culture. Then 2020 came, and I started to look at everything I was leading and everything I was doing and thinking, I'm not sure that size and organizational effectiveness is enough. I think we can actually create disciples that are too shallow. They don't know what they believe. They're not making disciples of other people. They're a part of an amazing, slick organizational system, and it looks so good on the outside. But when you start to really look and see what's going on in people's hearts and minds, or maybe when you look on social media and you see what people are posting and how they're reacting, I think, man, maybe there's something missing from this corporate model of church that needs to be recaptured, because could we be succeeding in creating an excellent corporation that is called the church, that has all of the growth systems and the strategies and the structures. And it feels so good to the consumer coming in, receiving ministry. But could we be creating a hollow version of what a Christian's supposed to be because we're missing other components that need to be, and some things I think that we have done since the pandemic would be counter to building the corporate model.
For sure.
Like preaching the hard truths of Jesus. Like Jesus, one of Jesus' success moments was the moment whenever he laid it down in John chapter 6 and said, unless you eat my flesh and drink my blood, you can have no part of me. And a whole bunch of people left. And that was success, because he was trying to define what it really means to follow Jesus. Or when John the Baptist had his disciples and all of his following leave him and go follow Jesus, which made his crowd size much smaller, but his long-term success as a person was much greater because he did his job. He pointed people to Jesus and the crowd started to follow the right person. So I think some of the things we've done since 2020 there's a benefit to the corporate model, but it has its limits when it comes to whether or not we're being successful in the eyes of God. Like you can build a growing church and not care about the poor. You can build a growing church and not and be building your own kingdom and not realize that it's actually happening. So some of it's motivation, and some of it is, I guess, defining what the target is, what we're after. So does that resolve anything inside of you?
I think it's a part of it. I think there's more questions. So yeah, I guess, okay, like you answered the part that some of it is stuff that you can't really see because it's hard stuff.
Mm-hmm.
And that maybe starts with the leader, and we can't see into the hearts of men the way that Jesus could. So some of it is you got to answer to God for this, right? But I'm just talking about in the case of where this goes well, and you're not just numerically. Let's say it's going well and people are being discipled well, like because you are saying the hard things, and it's not just your only goal isn't build the biggest empire possible. Your goal is grow, reach the lost, make disciples, and it's like, where is God? Because I'm saying even if the result's good, where is God in that process? Like I to me it feels like I don't feel like it's that honoring to God to be like, oh, like he did the whole thing. But then like secretly it's like, but it was like, I could write a book on all the things that worked. Do you know what I'm saying? I guess that's still true. There is a component of leadership, like Nehemiah, and Zerubbabel going back to rebuild Jerusalem and the temple. Like there's a way to do it. There's a methodology to actually succeed. And I'm sure they used their skills. I'm not saying don't use skills, but like, how is God different than chance? Do you know what I'm saying? Mm-hmm. Like at what I think I'm wrestling through, should there be some part of an invitation of God into the process? Is it just we follow the biblical principles, and because of that, because we're following like generally what God's asked to do with the church, like it's working? Do you understand what I mean? Because I think it's like, here's how it feels. The difference between a growing hollow church and a growing significant discipling church is not just systems and processes. Like
what is it?
I think that there's some more substance there. I think the kind of church that I want to be a part of is not just doing the general will of God well. They're obviously doing that, but I think that they're taking part of specific strategic things in a community.
Now we've hit something that is, I think, with the key to what you're saying. So what we said, I think, in the last episode we did November 2019, is we basically said success in God's economy is always based on obedience. And so if you're doing a model and the model's working, but it's not what God's asked you to do, technically might be successful in the eyes of people, but it may not necessarily be successful in the eyes of God, because success in the eyes of God is obedience. I think when you make steps of obedience, it's there that God gets involved. If it's not obedience, then God's God may or may not be involved. I think sometimes God blesses stuff that is just our own endeavors because we're preaching the gospel and people are getting saved. Like even Paul says in Philippians chapter 1, he's talking about these people who are competing with him and trying to undercut his ministry. And he is like, I'm still happy that the gospel is being preached, even though I believe that they're doing this from wrong motives. But hey, listen, whatever, for me to live in is Christ and to die is gain. So I think the question is a matter of obedience. So the corporate CEO model is not the only way that God does things. If God is leading you to do the corporate to learn from the other people and to go to a fast-growing city and to implement some of the strategies that are part of the corporate CEO model of church, and that for you is obedience because you know God's asked you to do that, then I think God's in it. Mm-hmm. But there are a lot of other ways. Like I don't want to focus too much on my story. You mentioned the 100 church vision before. There was a significant seminal moment in my life in 1996 where the church was growing based upon this. I was becoming more effective as a leader. I was becoming more effective as a communicator. The North Hills of Pittsburgh was growing. People were moving in here. Allison Park's numbers were increasing. We were going to move down the road, buy some property, build a bigger building so that we could be a bigger church. And the Holy Spirit said, that is not my agenda for you. My agenda for you, first of all, is to plant churches in the economically challenged communities all up and down the rivers of the city of Pittsburgh. And secondarily, I'm going to grow you. Your church is going to grow. But if you seek first my kingdom by planting churches, all these things are going to be added to you as well. At that point, I had to make a strategic obedience decision to go counter to the growth of my church to accomplish the purpose of God's specific will, because you said general will, specific will. God's specific will for Allison Park Church was to plant other churches. Now, his overall will was that we would grow too, because we've now tripled in size since that moment. So it's not like God was against us becoming bigger or even more excellent in the way we do what we do. It's just that the pathway forward was a very specific assigned direction. You experienced this, Dave, in the north side. So you hit a wall with how we were doing church at the north side with our Sunday morning experiences. And you led us strategically into saying, let's worry less about how it looks in comparison to the other campuses, and let's focus upon the mission that God has for us to really build a relationship with the community we're in, the north side of Pittsburgh, and specifically Northview Heights, which is one of the housing development plans there.
Yeah, right.
And we're going to worry less about whether this fits into the corporate model, and we're just going to serve our community. Mm-hmm. And you did that, and it grew. So wouldn't we say, I think that was you obeying the specific will of God for your situation, and God breathed on it and blessed it, and we've seen an increase in the numbers of people getting baptized and saved, and so I think isn't that what it is?
Yeah.
Isn't making sure that whatever you're doing in obedience to God, and not just because other people do it?
Yeah, that's probably true. Well, and I guess this is just this is probably taking the application of our How to Get a Word from God episode we did and maybe working through some of this practically. Because I think we talked in that episode about assignments from God, how you can get a specific assignment for your life or for your church, the house that you're part of.
And I think, too, we tend to, because the last episode we did was abortion and the American dream, and we were talking about, maybe the American dream is not a good target. And I think if we were going to apply this to the larger world around us, not just the church world, we would say sometimes success in American culture has become an idol.
Mm-hmm. Yeah, for sure it has.
Sometimes success in the ministry world has become an idol.
Right.
And that is outward, organizational, growth-oriented success.
Yep.
It is a good thing to grow. It is a good thing to reach new people. It's a good thing to do things with excellence. But it isn't the main thing.
Yeah.
The main thing we do is obey and please God.
It's a good thing to grow, but it's not a good thing to grow at any cost.
No, right. That's what we said. The American dream, there's a limit on it. It's not the American dream at any cost. It's not success in ministry at any cost. Not at the cost of my integrity. not at the cost of my humility, not at the cost of my obedience, not at the cost of limiting the presence of the Holy Spirit when he's wanting to move in a situation, but it doesn't fit into my box.
Right.
Not at the cost of me being willing to lose in order to gain temporarily, because I'm going to focus on something that might cause my organization to slow down, but I'm going to reach a demographic of people that maybe don't add much benefit back at the moment.
Sure.
But, okay, so I don't know if this is a sort of a delicate thing to talk about in the proper way. But so one of the things that we did in 2020 is we adopted or helped sponsor the launch of a East African Congregation Revival Church International. That has required my relationship with Bishop and helping to get that whole thing started, because it's a learning curve for me and it's a different culture, and a lot of times it's messy when you have people that are moving in and they're learning us and we're learning them. It's taken hours and hours and hours of my time to build a relationship with them and they with me. And really, it adds nothing to our organizational bottom line to have this relationship. It's not like we would say, this causes us now to say, well, look at how many we have. But it's been so worth it. I have grown so much and I've gained so much from these relationships. And we did this in obedience to God, not because it fit the corporate model. And some of the ways that you receive God's greatest attaboy, well done, my good and faithful servant, pleasure and favor is when we do things that don't seem like success at all, and in the eyes of anyone other than God, and yet bring him pleasure. There's this great book written by a Catholic priest, and it's called In the Name of Jesus, and I'm searching for the name of this guy now. Maybe I'll remember it before the end of the episode, or where you're talking next. I'll look it up. He was a successful lecturer and professor. He'd written many books, and he felt convicted that his soul was out of whack, almost like John Mark Comer's experience when he wrote Ruthless Elimination of Hurry. And he actually left his job as a professor at a prominent university and went to work in a care home for those who were mentally and physically challenged. So he went from corporate to chaplain, but chaplain amongst the most broken people of society. And he writes his experience of functioning in the name of Jesus in what seemed to be a counterculture move. Francis Chan, he's another guy. He built this huge church in California and then all of a sudden decided to leave it in order to go, I think he's back and forth as kind of a missionary to
I think he spent a lot of time in
various
Asia.
parts of Asia.
Yeah, right.
And so he left the corporate model because he felt like it was constraining him from really following Jesus in the kind of self-sacrificial, missional way of life that he felt needed to be lived. It is true that the corporate CEO motivational speaker model comes with enormous amounts of stress that tend to squeeze the life of your soul. They can make you into the type of person that is untouchable and arrogant if you're not careful. Here's another standard, I guess, of what success would be. If we said the first is obedience, the second would be character. Mm-hmm. So is it producing in me and in the people around me Christ-like character? Am I growing to become more like Jesus? Am I being obedient to his purpose? These are two things that I think we have to hold on to.
So let me pause for a second. I think, you know what, it just to be clear too, I don't have, there's no churches that I even am thinking of or could think of right now that I'm like, oh, these are the kind of places that are doing it the wrong way. It's more from my own internal wrestling that I'm coming with this, because it's like, okay, some things work, some things don't. Where every time we come to the beginning of a new school year, like August, September, we're rethinking what we're doing, and we're looking at how do we make this a place that people can, bring their unsaved friends and family to, and how do we reach the lost? And there's a lot of strategy, and it feels like it's this time of like, it's prayer, it's it's prayer and it's seeking God, but it's also planning. And so I think I'm wrestling this from the perspective of like, as I'm building and growing things and looking to steward what God's given me, am I doing this the right way? I think that's where this motivation is coming from. But I'll say, I think when you keep talking about obedience as being one of them, character and obedience, with obedience, to me, what feels like, oh, this is the nuance that gives me the check or no check, is, am I asking God, what do you want this year or this month? Because it's like, well, I would be being obedient to God as long as I'm like trying to reach the lost and make disciples. Like generally, if we're following the Great Commission.
But this is what you said. There's the general will and there's a specific will.
Yeah. Yes.
So we're generally being obedient, but you're talking about to be really successful, you have to be being specifically obedient.
I think if I am not taking it to the place of, God, what specifically are you asking? That what I'm at risk of is measurement and comparison and being generally obedient while the specifics are affecting my motivations. Does that make sense what I mean?
Yeah.
Because you could be probably I have at times been generally following the will of God, but I've been under tremendous stress because I'm trying to prove something to myself or to,
Well, the people that we celebrate in the Christian world in the United States are always the best motivational speakers and the best CEO leaders.
Biggest church, fastest growing area. Yeah.
And the better looking you are and the young and hip, the more you look young and hip online, so this is not an era where we look to the spiritual fathers and we say, this is someone who's sage and wise and self-sacrificing and lived amongst the poor. And like, that's not the hero of our culture. Mm-hmm. Maybe it should be. Maybe we shouldn't be always looking to the CEO leader, but that's the guys who speak at the events.
Right.
And that's the people that get held up as the success models. Mm-hmm. And that's how, when we get internally driven, we start to think, how do I become that?
That's who gets the awards, too.
It's who gets the awards, right?
It's like this. Hey, we're not just about stats, but all the awards are for the best stats right here. Come on down.
So when we stand before God, one day we'll find out whether we were successful or not.
Yeah, right.
And some of the people that we think are successful now may not necessarily be the most rewarded in heaven. Some of the people that are most rewarded in heaven, we might have no idea who their names are.
Yeah.
And so that's, I guess, another thing is have the right heroes. Because when we have the heroes that are based solely on the corporate success model, and those heroes fall, we have a tendency to have our world like, what happened? It like sort of messes with our equilibrium, and some of it has to do with the fact that we may be celebrating. There's a part of that should be celebrated, and in some sense, those who are leading in that way should be held up as models. But if they're the only models we see, and then we have a tendency to think. So the person who's doing successful urban ministry, and it doesn't look like the corporate, where are those people that we look at and we celebrate? And the people who are doing successful rural ministry and could never have a church of 10,000 because there's not even 10,000 people in their county. What are the models we look at there, right? So there has to be a way of viewing things through the lens of heaven so that we aren't superimposing an American 2024 version of life that is not the way God looks at things.
I think this is a little bit of my Allison Park Church bias, but part of how I would want to measure that, I think you actually can measure, but they tend to maybe get ignored a little bit as like, who is sending out the most people. Like, we talk about with coaches in sports, like their coaching tree, where Bill Belichick had these many people that went on to become successful head coaches. Like, how many people are we sending out and multiplying? People that are reaching the most hurting or poor or marginalized.
Yeah, that's another one I was going to say is when you're how does God get involved in our ministry? Here's one way that I pray that I think is very much in line with how God thinks. I pray like this: give me the one, God. Give me the guy who's coming out of prison and has no place else to belong. Give me the foster child, young person that's coming that needs a family to belong to. Give me the addict, that needs a church family to love them and help them break free. Give me the single mom that feels like she's all alone in the world. Give me the widow that has nothing to offer but is so longing for a pastor that will look at her eyes and let her know that she's valued and loved. Give me the person that has got that personality disorder. They don't belong to anybody else because they never fit in anywhere. Bring them to my church so that they feel like that they have a place to belong. Like, I want to be the church that welcomes the one that's overlooked, the one that's forgotten, the one that's a misfit, the one that doesn't feel like they connect anywhere. And God, if you give me those people, I'll feel like I'm wealthy.
Sure.
And I think that if your heart is that, because some churches are built like a country club, and they want the people that bring with them wealth and connection.
Well, I think the
which, by
the stage like example of that young person, that young CEO, motivational speaker leader, is often like, I'm reaching the movie stars. I'm reaching the, you know what I mean? It's the true. Artists, the new CEOs that need a pastor. It's like,
now I'm taking my picture with Justin Bieber. You know what I mean? Like
that's just by the way, Justin Bieber is doing awesome. Yeah. So don't be knocking Justin Bieber. He's putting out like worship stuff now on YouTube.
I heard that. But listen. So sometimes the celebrity, though, is the most lonely person in the world.
That's probably true.
Sometimes the CEO, I've met CEOs, and they don't have anybody that they can really be vulnerable with and friends with, because everybody puts them into this category of a person that no one can get around. So I actually want the CEO too, but I don't want them because they're going to bring some kind of money to me. I want them because I know God cares about them too, and in their space, there's a unique point of need there.
Right.
And so if you're there praying for people to come into your environment for what they can add to you, that's the wrong motivation. But if you're there praying for them to come so that you can add something to them, then that's the right motivation. And so I don't think there's anything wrong with having a church full of business owners who are shaking the world. But that person is not less important or more important than the guy who's homeless and is on the street. And when he comes into the service, he needs special welcome because people might not necessarily feel like they know what to do with that person. So I think some of it is our wiring and motivation, and some of it is our heart. And we have to really work hard to think like, here's a question for you. I'll ask this of you, Dave. If Jesus was alive today physically, what kind of church would he lead?
I don't know. I mean, I can think of some traits and characteristics generically.
Okay. Generically, give me some. Because I'm sure he was a great communicator.
Yeah, of course.
And I don't think he would be opposed to organization. I mean, when he had the crowd feeding the 5,000, he set them in rows of 50 so that the food could be distributed in a way that was pretty quick and orderly. So there was... And he had a crowd of over 20,000, they estimate, 5,000 men and women and children. So a lot of times Jesus was in a mega church size ministry moments in ancient culture, where that would have been unheard of in his day.
Yeah. I think he probably would have obviously been very loving and straight to the heart of those that feel like they're outcasts. And, I think he would have had no qualms about stepping on any toes, opening cans of worms, like pointing out the elephant in the room. I think he would have done that. He probably would have been provocative.
He would have been a rule breaker, meaning that once everything got set and you had certain expectations of the way things were, he would mess with that just specifically to make you think or adjust.
Yeah, I think he would have. And I think...
Because he was doing that all the time in his own culture.
I think he would have been the most, the word triggering. He would have been the most triggering person across all sides.
Not like a Donald Trump triggering kind of thing, but more of just a prophetic kind of triggering.
Yeah, right? Yeah, not abrasive, but he... sometimes was almost a little abrasive to Pharisees and stuff.
You're right. He was.
So I think I think he would have
never demeaning.
No.
Yeah, never demeaning. But yes, he was very direct and
confrontational.
Yeah.
Yeah. So I don't.
And he would have been totally okay if his crowds dropped.
Yeah, with losing the whole crowd. Which is crazy to think about that.
Yeah.
For
the sake of the message and the integrity of the movement, he was willing for everyone to leave.
I think something
and have
about
only 12 left.
On that note, I think something about like modern America churches, and I feel like this is just there's probably a piece of this that's wisdom, but I feel like it's usually only talked about as wisdom is like, well, if I say this, it's going to create such a mess. Or if we say it in this way, or if we're not super careful, you know what I mean, about this, like what will happen if the wrong clip gets out there, or if the wrong person takes this the wrong way.
It is true that saying things out of integrity and anointing for the right reasons that causes you a mess is a good thing. But being unwise and foolish is a bad thing. And there's a fine line between those two.
Yeah, I'm not saying, like, say whatever you want to, obviously.
Right. Well, some people attract a crowd because they are that.
It's true.
They like purposely say things that instigate, but they tend to attract a crowd of people who have the same prejudices as them. And they roll in because they love it when someone calls others out, right? And that's also some weird kind of success model that isn't necessarily at all a success in the eyes of God.
I just heard a pastor saying, that the best way, it sounded like he was quoting you. I've heard you say this almost directly, but he was just saying, if you want to grow a platform, you just need to be extremely critical of the right people on any. If you communicate it well and you come after celebrities or well-known pastors or leaders,
or an ideology, or a party, or a politician, or
he's saying you can make a lot of money.
Or you talk out of fear, or you talk out of alarmism, or you promote a conspiracy theory. I mean,
his quote was really, he was like, "You're not adding any service, but you can instantly make a lot of money."
Oh yeah, you get followers.
You got a huge amount of followers.
You can
just from being the most
some
critical
people grow
person
their
in the world.
churches exactly like that.
Yeah.
So we think of that as growing social media following, but actually, some people grow churches like that.
Yeah.
You can grow the church to a certain size by going after a particular whatever that makes people say, "Oh, I love that."
Yeah.
And
he's got the guts to say what needs to be said. Yeah, exactly.
Which probably isn't really success in the eyes of God.
Now, I'm sure that Jesus would have been thought of like that in some ways. He did have the guts to say some things.
He was an equal opportunity offender. He didn't just speak against one crowd. He did it very strategically.
That feels like a model of, that feels like a mark of obedience.
Yeah.
So
I can tell you.
Oh, I'm sorry.
So one of the things that I would say, Dave, as we're talking about this, is at this stage of my life, having led now for over 30 years in a local church, I care so much less about the corporate success model.
Okay.
I mean, as I get towards the end of my ministry time, I at one point I really wanted to see us reach a certain size, or I don't know. I don't think I haven't stated that out loud, but in my heart, I thought, won't it be great when we finally hit this next level? It's become really unimportant to me. Now, if all of a sudden we started dying, we dropped 500 people overnight, I'd be like, what am I doing wrong? And I'd probably go into an identity crisis. Let's just face it. Everybody has those reactions.
Yeah.
However, I think it would less affect me now. Maybe because I realized that some of this doesn't matter as much as I thought it did. I'd much rather finish well. I'd much rather have a positive reputation. I'd much rather be approachable. I'd much rather be humble. I'd much rather be able to say, I know I'm being obedient to what God's asked me to do, than have the other things. But I'm still trying to do things with excellence. I'm still trying to lead in my context by learning every good principle from every successful leader as I possibly can, and seeing which of these apply within my context without being disobedient to what God's assignment is to me. But the drive isn't there. I don't feel driven to it. I think that's another one of these factors. The success model often produces driven leaders because it makes us, how would you even describe drivenness? Because once it gets wired into you,
it's like, so this was possibly another episode that we were discussing. So I don't want to too hard go into it, but I think I can just do a little teaser for an episode we're talking about doing. Gordon MacDonald is a minister that wrote a book in I think the 80s. It was called Ordering Your Private World, and he had this. I read this a handful of years ago. I'm not even sure where I came onto it, but you had already read it when I told you about it. And he sort of has these this comparison of what he calls the driven person and the called person. And the driven person is the bad guy in this one, which to me, I was reading and I was like, I feel like he's You know what I mean? He's probably that kind of guy that like is against like hard work, and because driven, I'd always thought of as a good thing. Like you should be driven. You know, better to be told. That's what Josh said earlier. Better to be told to slow down than to have to speed up. Like go as fast as you can, as long as it's staying within the healthy norms and boundaries. But he talks about like a driven person is often driven by a level of ambition or insecurity. They are driven to grow quick. They're driven towards public acclaim. They're driven towards looking successful, valuing appearance over what's really there, over the substance of somebody's life, over their integrity or what's said in private. And that drivenness, while it can cause somebody to succeed, is sort of the antithesis or the opposite of somebody who walks as a called person. They only do what is being asked of them by God and nothing more than that. And they sometimes wait until they hear that right thing to go into. And it's a slower pace that has less guarantee of material success, but it is far more obedient over the long term. So for me, I read that, and this is something that we'll probably talk about another time again, but I read that and it challenged me, like how much of I driven, you know.
So the episode in the future would be, am I driven or am I called?
Right.
Right. Yeah. I think some drivenness happens because we get addicted to the success we're experiencing.
Sure.
Like there's moments when I've come out and we've just had a baptism service or a big attendance day, and I'm on like a high.
Or you crave the success you don't have.
Yeah, but there's also just like an emotional high. Like this past weekend, it wasn't the biggest Sunday ever, but in the smallest of our 4 weekend services that I preached, we saw, I think, 10 people raise their hand to give their life to Christ.
Wow.
And they most of them were the teenagers or young adults. And so they came back to the back, and I had multiple conversations with people who were coming to Jesus for the very first time. And I left, and I was floating.
Yeah.
I was like, I got to do that again. I can't wait till next week. Can't wait to preach again. And sometimes you get wired into the enjoyment of seeing the fruit that you're experiencing, and you can work just out of the joy of it. And without knowing it, you're beginning to run out of emotion and out of obedience. Like you're going off of the, wow, this is so great. Look at this. This is happening. And it's all good. But you can be overcome by just the euphoria of activity and lose touch with the fact that you are never supposed to stop following, never supposed to stop discerning, never supposed to stop slowing down to say, God, is this too much? Like Jesus had these rhythms of his life where he'd be with the crowds and spend himself and then pull away to be with the Father. And so you can, if you're not careful, you can ride that emotion to the place where you burn out and you feel like I got nothing left to give, and then you crash. And success has that euphoric effect on us that if we're not careful, becomes an intoxicating force that's driving us forward into things, or just because we can. Like just because you can do it and just because you are effective at it doesn't mean that you're in the right space doing what God wants you to do at that particular moment.
I think it's such a difference. Just because what you're doing is going to work doesn't mean it's what God's asking you to do.
There you go.
And that feels...
You've answered your question.
Yeah.
That is, if you're going to summarize this episode, it's what you just said.
Yeah. Just because what you can do will work doesn't mean it's what God's asking. I think that's the dilemma in church and church growth. Is, well, did God ask you to do this? Did God ask you to grow it like that? But I'm doing generally the right thing.
If you ask that every hour, you're going to be never doing anything.
Yeah, right.
Every couple of weeks.
At least a couple times a year.
Yeah, you need to say, am I still doing what I'm supposed to do? Is there anything you want me to adjust? My heart right with you, God? Am I wanting the right people? Have I become intoxicated with my own success? Am I trying to build my own reputation?
Yeah.
Is there a way for me to counteract how, the momentum of this has been bad for my soul? How do I take second place? How do I humble myself? All of these are good checks for us to come back to make sure we're lined up properly.
It's great. All right. Well, I think that about wraps up. Any closing thoughts?
I would just say it's been such an honor to be able to be partners with God and in ministry. And I know I haven't always done it perfectly. Sometimes I've been driven instead of called. Sometimes I've been caught up in the euphoria of it all. There have been days I've been frustrated with the fact that what I'm doing isn't succeeding on the same level as maybe what someone else. But I know I'm never going to be perfect at this. But I love the question that I have to keep coming back to, because it's truly an honor to serve God in this capacity of leading in his kingdom, leading in his church. So these kinds of moments are like this particular topic. Hopefully we've made you pause and ask some good questions, but I'll just say stay in the game. Keep on leading. Lead to the best of your ability. You don't have to be perfect with this, but try to be obedient in the space where you're in. Let God bless you there. And keep coming back to the center where you can get into that position where you're dependent on him. How about you? What's your final thoughts? Just because you can doesn't mean that that's what God's leading you to, right? Is that what basically?
Doesn't mean it's being obedient. Just because it's going to work doesn't mean it's what God's asking of you, is I think what I was thinking. Yeah, I think asking the question is where all this starts. I think the danger is going on autopilot, going on growth-oriented autopilot. Mm-hmm. It's working, and then all of a sudden I'm exploding and I'm burnt out, or you're on the risk of having a real failure of integrity, or you're in a spot of.
I think John Maxwell said it's good to be climbing the ladder. Just make sure the ladder's not leaning up against the wrong wall.
Right. Yeah. So I think the question's the right one to ask. I think God's honored when we ask him too. Mm-hmm. Like, Holy Spirit, are you leading me this way? Is this what are these the people to focus on, Jesus? Because I could go here, but I think asking that question, and I believe he wants to answer, and I believe that the process of us partnering with him is what makes him proud more than the numbers that we have or the success that we have.
I think we enjoy it together. He enjoys working with me. I enjoy work. It's amazing that I could say that, right? That God enjoys working with us, and that we enjoy working with him back, and it's part of the pleasure of it.
Yeah.
And I think one piece of real success is that you are living in that pleasure. Living in the pleasure of partnership with God.
Wow.
Where you're saying to each other, look at what we get to do together. That's a beautiful thing.
Good. All right. Well, that about does it for today. Yeah. So I hope you enjoyed being a part of this conversation. I think we're sort of live processing. So at least I am. I guess you're on, the further end of
always. That's part of the beauty of this podcast. We're both live processing things, and that's part of why you have to give us some grace in some of the things we say on these episodes. Because just to let you in on how the sausage is made, so to speak, we don't prep for these. Like you do to some degree for a little bit, but never for a whole lot. Some of your prep is what you're reading. Yeah. But you'll bring your concerns and disturbances to the table, and then we just have an open, raw conversation about it. And that's why sometimes you'll hear us say things like, I think this, but I'm not sure. I don't want to offend over here, because we really are unfiltered here. This is the one space we get to do that, and we're glad that you're a part of these conversations. So if you can leave us a like or a review, or a comment today, or you want to subscribe for us on YouTube, that would be awesome.
It's kind of crazy. Probably in our 5 years, we've only had to flush maybe 10 episodes total, where we started and we're like, that's bad. That's always a crappy feeling, as you're like, this isn't working, Dave.
Yeah,
like,
and one we thought was really amazing, and the camera wasn't
on. We lost it. I don't even know what that was, like a year and a half ago. That was discouraging. Yeah. So now we know to look for a red light right in that camera. Oh, thank you, producer Matt, for keeping us on task with that now. But hey, we also just, like you said, we want to just say thank you for being a part of this. If you would like to engage with us, any of those things Jeff just mentioned would be great. You can leave us a 5-star review. And again, if you do that on Apple, if you do it on an Apple Podcast, we'll see your name. We'd love to shout you out. But any of those platforms you're listening on would be great. You can actually watch it now and leave comments on Spotify as well, or on YouTube. You can like and subscribe, share it on social media. All of this is a way that you can actually help us to reach more people. So if you would consider yourself to be a part of our sort of podcast family, you've been listening for a while, maybe just consider doing us a favor by helping to spread the word, and we would really appreciate it. So again, thanks for joining us. We'll see you guys again next time.